I'm Emma, 41, and I manage a small chain of coffee shops in Portland. Most mornings start before sunrise with a spreadsheet of sales, espresso in hand, and the hum of refrigerators filling the quiet. My husband, Michael, is an accountant. Precise, steady, the kind of man who balances life like a ledger. We've been married 12 years. Our routines run smoothly. Breakfast at 7, laundry on Sundays, polite goodnights that sound more like habits than affection. Nothing is wrong, not really. It's just that everything feels measured. That Thursday evening, we met his colleagues for dinner at a bar that tried to look casual, but served cocktails with herbs floating on top. I was late after covering a shift. When I arrived, Michael stood to pull my chair, automatic, not romantic, and asked if traffic was bad. I said it was fine. The table was full of jokes and office stories. Then someone laughed and said Michael probably lives inside Excel. Everyone chuckled except him. He smiled politely and said, "That's not really appropriate." The moment passed, but something about it lingered. Watching him, calm and exact, I realized how far apart we'd drifted. Me filling silence with small talk. Him editing life like data. Driving home, he mentioned new tax software and his coworker's car lease. I nodded at the right times. His voice was even, practiced, safe. When we parked, he kissed me goodnight like he was signing off an email. I brushed my teeth, folded my sweater, and wondered when our life had become this quiet. The next week, during a slow morning at the cafe, a man I didn't recognize walked in. Early 30s maybe, worn notebook in hand. The confident ease of someone who noticed things. "Large drip, room for cream," he said, then added, "You look like someone who doesn't drink coffee. You manage it." I should have ignored him, but I laughed. "That's part of the job," I said. He smiled and left. He came back the next day and the one after that. His name was Jake. He worked nearby, always ordered the same coffee, and somehow turned small talk into something that felt sharper, alive. Once he left a napkin with a scribble, "Consistency is overrated." It stayed in my apron pocket all day. At home, Michael suggested a weekend getaway. "Just us," he said. "We could use it." I told him I couldn't. Staff shortage, upcoming inspection, lies that came too easily. He didn't argue, only nodded, already used to my absences. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, holding an old tube of red lipstick. I hadn't worn it in years. I put it on, wiped most of it off, then put it on again. At work, Jake noticed immediately. "New look?" he asked. "Just needed some color," I said, pretending to check the register. "Good choice," he said. His voice was calm, but I felt the compliment settle under my skin. That night, as I locked the cafe, I caught my reflection in the window. Same uniform, same tired face, but something about it felt new. Not younger, not prettier, just awake. The next day began like any other, rain misting the windows, the bus rattling through downtown, a thin layer of routine holding everything together, yet something small had shifted, quiet but undeniable. I checked my reflection twice before leaving, added a touch of lipstick I almost wiped off, and told myself it was habit. By 10, the cafe smelled like toasted beans and wet coats, and Jake appeared, just as he had all week, notebook under his arm, a little too comfortable in a place that wasn't his. He ordered his usual black coffee, no sugar, and leaned slightly forward while I poured. "You always move like you're timing yourself," he said, not looking at the cup but at my hands. I laughed because that's what I do when I don't know how to respond. "Occupational hazard," I said. He tilted his head. "Or personality." It wasn't a flirt. It was an observation, precise and unsettling. When he left, he slid a folded receipt toward me. "Control is a polite word for fear," it said in quick, slanted handwriting. I should have thrown it away, but I kept it tucked under my sleeve until the end of the day. At home, Michael was on the couch, laptop open, numbers reflected in his glasses. He asked if I wanted to go out that weekend. He'd booked a restaurant, the one where we used to sit by the window and talk about plans we no longer made. "I can't," I said without hesitation. "It's inventory week." The lie was simple and smooth, no guilt attached. He nodded, not hurt, just tired, and went back to the screen. We sat in that careful silence that fills a house when everything looks fine, but nothing feels alive. Over the next few days, Jake became part of the rhythm of the cafe, showing up late mornings, never lingering too long, always saying just enough to make me curious. Sometimes he'd mention a book, sometimes a headline, sometimes nothing at all, just a comment about the playlist or the smell of the new roast. It wasn't conversation so much as a thread that kept pulling at me. One afternoon, when I handed him his drink, our fingers touched. It was brief, unplanned, but the spark of awareness that followed stayed far longer than it should have. That evening, while Michael made dinner, I caught myself watching the way he measured olive oil into the pan. Steady, exact, careful. For years I'd found comfort in that predictability. Now it only reminded me how completely our lives had narrowed. He asked if something was wrong, and I said no, smiling too quickly. He didn't believe me, but he didn't push. The next day, Jake arrived just before closing. The cafe was nearly empty, lights dimmed, the sound of rain soft against the glass. He stood at the counter, studying me for a moment before saying, "You ever feel like you're polite with your own life?" It wasn't a pickup line, it was a quiet truth. I looked at him, then down at the counter, unsure if I was supposed to answer. "Maybe," I said finally. He smiled, slow and knowing, and left without another word. When I locked up that night, the cafe felt too still. The reflection in the window looked familiar, but thinner, as though part of me had already stepped outside and wasn't sure how to come back in. It happened on a Tuesday night, the kind of shift that drags on forever until the air itself feels heavy. Jake stayed after closing, offering to help count the till. I almost said no, but the word caught in my throat. The cafe was quiet except for the low hum of the espresso machine cooling down. Outside, the streets were glossy with rain, and the neon sign from the diner across the road flickered on and off like a heartbeat. For once, I didn't mind the stillness. We sat on the bar stools, sharing a half bottle of wine left over from a tasting event. The numbers on the receipt sheet blurred as the minutes passed, conversations stretching between us in small, unhurried waves. He asked what it was like to manage a place like this every day, and I told him the truth, that it was work I loved and resented equally, a mix of order and chaos that somehow kept me anchored. He listened carefully, not waiting for his turn to speak, just letting me fill the space. After a while, he said, "You sound like someone who's been quiet for a long time." The comment wasn't flirtatious. It was diagnostic, and it landed with more accuracy than I wanted to admit. I tried to deflect with humor, but it came out uneven, and the silence that followed felt like a confession. He didn't move closer, not yet. He just looked at me, the way people do when they've decided on something, but are waiting for you to notice. Our hands met when he reached for his glass. The touch was brief, but the air changed completely. For a second, the noise from the fridge and the rain outside faded to a dull blur. My body registered the moment before my mind caught up. I could have stepped back, ended it there, turned off the lights, locked the door, and gone home. but I didn't. He spoke quietly, almost hesitant. You look different when you're not pretending to be fine. The words made my chest tighten. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I wasn't pretending, that everything was fine, but the truth was sitting right there between us. When he leaned in, there was no surprise, no rush, no hesitation left to use as a shield. The kiss wasn't dramatic or desperate. It was slow, deliberate, and real in a way that made my hands tremble. When we pulled apart, I kept my eyes closed for a second longer than I should have, because opening them meant acknowledging what had just happened. Jake exhaled softly and said, "You don't need to explain." I shook my head, not trusting my voice. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then I stood, muttered something about cleaning up, and reached for the towel I didn't need. He nodded once, as if to say he understood, and left without another word. Outside, the night was colder than I expected. I walked to my car quickly, trying to focus on the sound of my footsteps instead of the pulse still beating in my throat. When I got home, Michael was asleep on the couch, glasses on, laptop open to a half-finished spreadsheet. I turned off the light, careful not to wake him, and stood there watching him breathe. It wasn't guilt that filled me. It was something heavier. Grief for the life I had been living without realizing how small it had become. In the bathroom mirror, my lipstick was smudged at the corners, faint but visible. I should have wiped it off right then, erased the evidence, but I didn't. I stared at myself for a long time, waiting to feel regret. Instead, I felt the sharp, painful certainty that nothing would ever fit the same way again. The days that followed felt off balance, like walking on a floor that tilted slightly when no one else noticed. Michael didn't ask questions, but I could tell he sensed something. He'd study me over dinner with quiet focus, not suspicious, just observant, as if trying to reconcile a number that wouldn't round up. I responded with practiced ease, talking about shipments and staff schedules, keeping my tone even while my stomach turned with the weight of what I wasn't saying. Every time I caught his eyes, I felt the same flicker of guilt, brief and confusing, because I didn't even know what I was guilty of anymore. At the cafe, I waited for Jake without admitting it to myself. The first few days he didn't come, and I told myself it was over. But the hope that he might return sat stubbornly beneath everything I did. When he finally walked in that Friday afternoon, my pulse jumped so sharply I had to steady my hands before pouring his coffee. I handed him the cup and said, "We made a mistake." My voice came out lower than I meant, calm but brittle. He didn't deny it. "If it was a mistake," he said, "then maybe we should repeat it to be sure." His tone was playful, but his eyes weren't. I wanted to sound decisive, to shut the door on the whole thing, yet I couldn't form the words. Instead, I just stared at him, silent, as the grinder hummed in the background. He smiled faintly, nodded once, and left his cup on the counter when he walked out. When I came back to clean, I found a small key under the saucer with a note that read, "When you need space, this opens it." That night, I placed the key in my purse, telling myself I'd throw it away. I didn't. It stayed there, pressing into my side each time I moved. At home, Michael was cooking. The smell of garlic and butter filled the kitchen, warm and familiar. He handed me a glass of wine and asked how work was. "Fine," I said too quickly. He looked at me for a long moment before replying, "You've been somewhere else lately." I laughed, a reflex I didn't mean, and said I was just tired. He didn't believe me, but he let it go. Later, after he fell asleep, I took the key out and placed it on the table. It was nothing special. Plain metal, small enough to disappear in a pocket, but it felt heavy. I thought about Jake's words, about the door it belonged to, about the strange comfort of having something that wasn't Michael's, not even mine yet, just different. I stayed up for hours staring at that key under the soft glow of the kitchen light, until exhaustion blurred my thoughts into something close to peace. The next morning, Michael was already up, coffee brewing, the quiet sound of a man holding his life together. He looked at me across the counter and said, "You don't seem happy anymore." I wanted to tell him the truth, that happiness wasn't the point, that I didn't even know what I wanted, but I only said, "I'm fine," because it was easier. He didn't push, and that kindness hurt more than anger would have. I went to work with the key still in my bag, its shape pressing through the fabric like a secret I wasn't ready to give up. I didn't use it, didn't even touch it all day, but knowing it was there changed everything. It wasn't about Jake anymore. It was about the realization that I had built a life where someone else's key felt like freedom. It happened on an ordinary Thursday evening, the kind that begins without warning and ends with a kind of quiet you can't mistake. I was taking out the trash when I heard the faint buzz of my phone on the counter. When I came back inside, Michael was sitting at the table, elbows resting on his knees, my phone in his hands. His face wasn't angry, just pale, as though he'd stepped into a room and found the air missing. He looked up slowly and said, "Who's Jake?" For a moment, I forgot how to speak. I wanted to lie, to say he was a client, a supplier, anyone, but the words wouldn't come. Michael waited, the phone still open on the table, the messages small and damning. "Don't say he's a customer," he said quietly. "You're not good at lying all the way through." Something in me snapped. Maybe it was relief. "You haven't seen me in years," I said, my voice shaking. "You talk about work and bills and taxes, but you never ask how I am." He stood, his hands flat on the table. "You disappeared long before Jake showed up." His tone wasn't cruel. It was calm, factual, like a man reading a line from a report. Somehow that hurt more than if he'd yelled. We argued without shouting, each of us holding our ground as if there were something left to win. Every sentence hit harder than the last, not because of what was said, but because of how long it had gone unsaid. I told him I felt invisible. He told me I'd stopped showing up. I said he'd chosen comfort over connection. He said I'd chosen escape over honesty. When the words finally ran out, there was nothing left but exhaustion. That night, we slept in the same bed, our bodies angled away from each other like strangers who happened to share an address. In the morning, Michael made coffee and left for work without saying goodbye. I stood by the window long after he was gone, holding my cup and wondering if this was what ending quietly looked like. Jake didn't come to the cafe again. At first I thought he might call or send another note, but the silence stretched on until it became its own answer. Each day I checked the door at 10, pretending not to. Each day it stayed closed. When I finally accepted that he wasn't coming back, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. The thrill had burned out, leaving behind something like truth. At home, the distance between Michael and me turned into routine. We shared meals without conversation, chores without coordination, space without warmth. Some nights I caught him staring at the ceiling, his face blank, and I knew he was calculating what it would cost, emotionally, financially, practically, to undo a marriage this old. I didn't blame him. I was doing the same math. The silence in our apartment became unbearable, but neither of us broke it. I started staying late at work, pretending to clean, avoiding the moment when I'd have to turn the key in the door and face him. He stopped asking where I'd been. I stopped asking what he was thinking. We existed beside each other, two people keeping a fragile peace because admitting defeat felt harder than living in limbo. One night, I found the key Jake had left me buried under receipts in my purse. I held it for a long time, feeling its cold weight against my palm, and realized that it no longer felt like freedom. It felt like proof of everything I'd been running from. I placed it back in the drawer and turned off the light. The apartment was quiet, but for once it wasn't the kind of quiet that hides things. It was the kind that follows a storm. The weeks after that argument moved in slow, muted waves, the kind of time that doesn't feel like living so much as waiting. I kept showing up at work, unlocking the doors, smiling at customers, pretending I was fine, while underneath everything ran the dull hum of failure. The cafe's routine, the noise, the orders, the rhythm, was the only thing holding me together. Then one morning, I found the courage to apply for a promotion that had been sitting on the bulletin board for months. It felt like something I could control, something clean. When the answer came back, it was a short email from my district manager. "We appreciate your initiative, but we're looking for someone more consistent under pressure." I stared at the screen for a long time, rereading that one line until the words lost shape. It wasn't the rejection that stung. It was the subtext, that I'd become unreliable, emotional, unpredictable. I closed my laptop and went to the back room, where I sat on a crate for a full 10 minutes just breathing. That afternoon, I checked my phone on break and saw an unfamiliar number with a short message. "Don't look for me. I've moved to San Francisco, but don't pretend nothing happened. You changed, and that's good." There was no name, but it didn't need one. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. The text didn't make me angry or sad. It just landed somewhere deep, leaving a hollow kind of acceptance behind. Jake was gone, and what he had stirred in me wasn't a love story. It was a wake-up call I hadn't known I needed. That night, I came home to find Michael setting the table. The smell of garlic and lemon filled the kitchen, the kind of dinner he made when he wanted to fix something without talking about it. "I thought we could eat together," he said, voice calm, almost tentative. "Maybe. Consider therapy." For the first time in weeks, I looked directly at him. He wasn't pleading. He was trying. I agreed, not because I believed we could go back, but because I was too tired to keep circling the same silence. The therapist's office was warm, lined with plants and soft lighting, the kind of place built to make you trust strangers. On the third session, she asked, "Do you both still believe you're together?" The question lingered between us, heavy and honest. Michael looked at me first, waiting for an answer I didn't have. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, realizing that any words I chose would only dilute the truth. We both stayed quiet, not defensively this time, but because, for once, there was nothing left to explain. After the session, we walked to the car side by side. It wasn't tense, just oddly peaceful. On the drive home, the sky hung low and gray, and the rain traced thin streaks across the windshield. Michael finally said, "You know, I'm not angry. Just sad we didn't notice sooner." I nodded. It wasn't enough, but it was the closest thing to honesty we'd shared in months. At home, we ate leftovers in silence and watched the cat chase a shadow across the floor. The small domestic sounds, the hum of the fridge, the ticking clock, felt both comforting and unbearable. When he said goodnight, I didn't answer right away. I just watched him walk down the hallway, a man who had once been my world and now felt like someone I was learning to let go of, piece by piece. For the first time, our quiet didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like the beginning of truth. Months passed before I noticed that life had started to take shape again. I moved into a small apartment a few blocks from the river, the kind of place with creaky floors and sunlight that came in unevenly through the blinds. There was no ceremony in leaving, no shouting, no dramatic packing, no slammed doors. One morning, I just filled a box with clothes, a few books, my coffee press, and left. Michael didn't try to stop me. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, and said quietly, "Take care of yourself." I said I would. It was the first conversation we'd had that felt honest in months. The first few weeks alone were strange. I missed the sound of another person moving through the house, even if we barely spoke. I missed the rhythm of predictability, the certainty of who'd make coffee, who'd lock the door. But the emptiness soon became something gentler, something that didn't scare me anymore. I started walking home after work instead of taking the bus, watching people in shop windows, learning the city's evening sounds. I'd always thought solitude was loneliness. It turned out to be relief. One afternoon, I came home to find an unmarked envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just my name, written in slanted handwriting I recognized immediately. Inside was a single line on a folded piece of paper. "The keys are to let go, not to open." Taped beneath the note was the same small key Jake had left me months earlier. For a long time, I just stared at it, unsure what I was supposed to feel. Then I smiled, small, not sad, and realized that it didn't matter why he sent it. What mattered was that it no longer held power over me. The next morning, I dropped the key into a metal collection box at the police station. It wasn't symbolic, not really. I just wanted it gone. When the key clinked against the metal, it sounded final, quiet in a satisfying way. Walking out into the gray afternoon, I felt lighter, not healed, not whole, just clearer. Later that week, I stopped by my old cafe. The new manager had changed the layout. The counter was farther left, and the air smelled different. I ordered a cappuccino and waited by the window, half expecting the door to open and see Jake again, though I knew better. When I turned to leave, I nearly bumped into Michael. He was standing in line, holding his phone, his hair a little shorter, looking more relaxed than I remembered. He noticed me at the same moment and smiled. Not forced, not heavy, just a quiet human smile. "Hey," he said, "how are you?" "I'm good," I replied, and for once it wasn't a performance. He nodded. "You look like yourself again." "Maybe I finally am," I said. We talked for a minute or two, nothing deep, just small, easy things. Then he ordered his drink, and I left. As I stepped outside, the sky was clearing after days of rain, and sunlight caught the wet pavement in thin, uneven streaks. I took a deep breath and kept walking, past the cafe, past the corner where the buses stopped, past everything that used to hold me in place. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to rush anywhere. I wasn't running from guilt or chasing excitement. I was simply moving forward, slowly, deliberately, like someone who finally understood the weight of her own choices. And for once, that felt like enough.